Do you think that Ares really loved you?
Definitely.
I agree.
Oh, I think absolutely.
Or do you think...
As far as his cold little heart would allow.
Do you think that he was trying to manipulate the relationship so he could have a child of his own? And that he really didn't love you at all?
No. No, I think that it's true he wanted everything that she could give him, but she had a lot to offer.
So he really did want, he did want a
that.
relationship with you. He wanted to have the...
Not me, XENA.
Oh, I know.
You're trying to convince me that you love me.
Well, go on, say it. Say it. Say you love me.
He basically is this little puppy dog following her around trying to say I love you when he can't say it. And it was a tough scene to do because they didn't want to go overboard to make it sappy. Kevin, a very professional, always prepared, funny, very funny guy off set. And he and Lucy were really, they really liked each other.
The time for you and me has been and gone.
It was worth a shot anyway.
God-Fearing Child was one of the first episodes where we had a few crew changes as well, which was interesting. I think Jane Holland had been on designing costume for a while because Nyla had left to go and do Lord of the Rings. But one of the most significant things for me was that Cameron McLean, who had been my operator ever since the beginning, had moved on to do a second unit job on Lord of the Rings. And so I had a new camera operator, Dana Little, who stepped up to the plate and rose to the challenge and did a wonderful job on that episode.
Sleep tight.
I remember the fight. It was so odd having XENA and Gabrielle and then Hercules in this big fight with all these stuntmen around, and it took me back to something. I couldn't figure out. I've never actually fought with Kevin before, but it reminded me of Prometheus, I guess, just having him, the two of you side by side.
Hey, you got trowels in this, didn't you? You got your little gardening forks.
My trowels. Yeah, I had the size. It was the first time, in a while that Gabrielle had had a weapon again. I think it was after the whole peace movement. And she, Rob was trying to figure out, you know, what weapon. Was thinking about going back to the staff, and then I think I mentioned a whip. No, I'm kidding. And he's like, no, I don't think so. No, actually, I did mention nunchucks, and he said, I think it's a little violent for Gabrielle. And
Forking people, no trouble.
I had not directed a couple of female actors in this sense of action, and it was great to see that they were, you know, they're totally into it, and they kind of, you know, leapt into everything full bore. I mean, they were really, they wanted to make it the best they could make it, running around in not a lot of clothing, and it's cold out, and you've got a coat on, but they're doing their thing.
I remember it being very funny shooting the scene when Gabrielle puts on the helmet of invisibility and then she sneaks around and starts to beat up the bad guys. And watching these stunties trying to beat themselves up and pretend that there was someone there smacking the hell out of them was fantastic, but they did a really good job of it. But we were sitting around, I think after the first take, everyone was just cracking up, seeing these guys throwing themselves about, pretending to be hit by an invisible foe.
Charles, I had not worked with before. He is Zeus, you know. He comes from a large theater background. And when he came in and his hair is, that's his real hair, the long, curly, full hair, I was like, oh my God, he's got such presence.
Do you really believe that humanity can survive?
There's a scene in a temple early on in the episode where Zeus and Ares have a long conversation, and we had big shafts of light. I think there were 6 huge windows in that set, and It's one of the classic cases where we put 6 big lights outside the window and bounce them into mirrors to get a sharper, more defined effect coming through the window, and fill a set with smoke and get these big shafts of God light coming through the windows.
Well, Dad, what's it gonna be?
Lucy had just had her baby, so that was one wrinkle, if you call it that, in the show. It just that we had to deal with, you know, her coming back, and she was totally in shape and totally gung ho for it. So it was fun to see her tackle that.
I think I was back to work on that 1 month after having my baby, and I really think it's too soon to be jumping off boxes.
But I'm ready to live with what I have to do.
If you live.
I think Kevin was sensitive to his character in that he didn't want to take life purposely. Within the sequence, we had it in such a way where Zeus was going to kill Xena and her baby, and her runs in and tackles him, and in the tackle and in the rolling over, the blade of the bone goes through Zeus's chest.
This didn't have to happen.
Every son must eventually take his father's place.
Giving birth on film is not like giving birth in real life, obviously. It's much easier, much quicker.
It was pretty graphic, though. I mean, not that we obviously did anything like a real birth, but I definitely felt for you, you know, and I don't think it took very much for you to remember what it was like.
Take it off. No, okay. I'm cold. You're cold? No. Okay, take these off. Okay, okay.
Renee wanted to make sure everything was real and as real as possible. And I think Lucy said, "Don't worry, I know how to get through this one."
You're doing great. Come on.
There were moments in the birth scene that are well documented, things that happen during labour, like...
Did they happen to you in particular?
Yeah, because you're cold and then you're hot, and
Right.
and then you have the transition tantrum, it's called, and where your body kicks into another gear, and women very often just turn around and go at whoever's trying to help them, and it's actually a good sign. It means you're moving on. Anyway, so there's a little bit of that in the scene where Gabrielle's trying to help, and Xena tells her to shut up.
Hey, do you remember when Effie had her baby? Remember how you helped her?
Please be quiet. Just be quiet.
I was more concerned with the baby being cold or
Covered
hungry.
in cream cheese.
Covered in cream cheese, yeah. And I guess I was also interacting with the baby more.
Which is true, it's not a joke. You really do cover them with cream cheese.
Cream cheese and jam.
Jam.
Yeah.
To make them look like they've just come out.
Yes, where we had one male baby, yes. Now I remember we had to kind of cover up in a certain area to make sure. But I really don't remember if we had more than 2. They might have even been twins. Who knows?
There's a sequence that we did under a huge big old tree out at the Wheelers farm at Bethel's, where we did a lot of shooting, and the sun happened to be, I think, at a high angle shining down through the tree, and it was a very windy day, so all across the ground and all across the action area we were getting this pattern of hard sunlight shade that would move in relationship to the wind through the tree branches and the tree leaves. And sometimes that kind of thing's real difficult and you sort of fight it, but in this instance I just thought I'll run with it and use it. I love those kind of dynamic lighting effects that happen naturally in shot, and they give it a little bit of visual interest that you might otherwise not have. So it was a lucky break.
There was a nice moment when she's talking to her new baby and the sun kind of peeked through and lit the baby's face up toward the end, which I thought was like quite nice to, you know, have happen right in the middle of that scene, because it was like the gods were shining upon it, even though they weren't around anymore.